In this video, I want to go through some ways that we can process arrays and different things that we can do, some algorithms that we commonly use when we work with arrays. So to start out, I created a small array called mylist. The book uses this mylist variable. I would caution you, a list in Java is actually a different data structure than an array. So later on, you will learn about lists. Just know that when we're using this variable, we're creating lists of numbers stored in an array. They are not stored in a list. So please don't confuse those later on. We are not learning about lists here. This is an array called mylist. All right, so I use the shortcut method to create an array. Use the curly braces here. So this array is going to have 5 elements in it. And it's going to contain 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. And I want to use a small for loop to show you how we can print out the contents of an array. So for this, we're using the for loop. Int I starts at 0. And here's something that we commonly do that's very, very common. Instead of saying I less than 5, which I could say here because I want to count up to my 5 elements of my array. Instead of that, I'm saying while I is less than mylist.length. Okay, so this code will work if I have 5 elements in my array. Each time it goes through, it's going to print mylist sub I. So it'll print mylist sub 0, which is 2, then mylist sub 4, or excuse me, mylist sub 1, which is 4, mylist sub 2, which is 6, with a space in between them. So let's go ahead and run that. And you can see it printed out 2, space 4, space 6, space 8, space 10, space. All right, so we can process through an array using that for loop. Again, we're using mylist.length. And the benefit to that is if I decide I want to change the length of this loop, now my loop is size 6, I don't have to come down here and change this number to a 6. It will automatically process all of the elements in the array because it's using the length of the array to determine how long the for loop is going to run. All right, I paused the video and I changed the code up a little bit. I did leave the for statement at the bottom that is going to print out my array at the end. But I changed how I've initialized the array up here, and I want to show you some more good coding practice. When we create an array, remember, once we create it, we can't change its size. So that size is really constant. So the best way to do that is to create a constant. So I'm using the keyword final to create an int called size. And because I use the keyword final, that means it's a constant. It can't ever be changed. So my code down here is not allowed to change the size, which makes sense because it refers to the size of my array. And I use all caps to show that that's a constant. And I'm setting its value to 5. And now when I create my list, I declare my list. I create a new object of which is an array of ints of size. So in this case, it'll be size 5. It's going to create an array with 5. So that is a very common practice to use a constant. Anywhere I want to use size, or if I wanted to use size in my loops down here, I could say I less than size here, which means when I change my size at the top, it would automatically change my loops as well. I prefer to use mylist.length because it's dynamic. But you could easily use that size variable here and that size variable here. If we decided to go with a different size, we change it up here, and we still don't have to adjust any of our code. Now, what does this code do? This is a for loop that we're going to use to initialize our array. So I didn't set my values of my array when I did this, so we're going to allow the user to set the values of this array. So I created a scanner. Of course, I had to import scanner up here. And I do a system out print, enter, and it's going to print the length of my list here. And in this case, it'll print enter 5 values. And then I have another for loop, just like this for loop here. But this time I'm setting the values of each of the items in my list to whatever the user inputs. So I'm calling scanner. The scanner name is input. I'm saying input.nextInt. It's getting the next int, storing it in item 0, then item 1, then item 2, and then this other for loop is going to print those values back out to us. So let's run that. Enter 5 values. I will enter 5, and I made a mistake. Let me try it again. I fat fingered and accidentally put a decimal point in, and it was a double, and it can't store double as an int. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, and then it prints the numbers back out using that same for loop that we saw before. So this goes through one at a time, asks the user for input, and sets each item in the list to whatever the user has inputted. So that's allowing a user to initialize our array values. Okay, here is some more code that I did off screen. I'm still using the same initialization. The only thing I've changed up here is now I'm allowing my array to store doubles instead of ints. So I changed its type, so because I wanted to use doubles on this one. And on this one, I'm using the same for loop that we did before, counting from 0 while I is less than mylist.length. Very, very common to process any loop doing that. To process any array doing that, we count from 0 to less than the name of the array.length. Okay, and in this case, I'm setting each of the values in my list, I sub 0, I sub 1, I sub 2, to a random number. So I'm using math.random, which gives me a number from 0 to 1 decimal, and we're multiplying that by 100 to give us a decimal number from 0 to 99.99999. And then I'm printing them back out again. So let me run this. And then here we go. We get 5 numbers: 50.9493, 96.12, 77.30. Okay, so inside a loop, we're generating random numbers, and I did 5 of them. I could easily do 100 just by changing size up here. And now I have 100 random numbers from 0 through 99.9999. All right, so that's initializing a loop with random values. Okay, off screen, while you were on pause, I updated the code a little bit. I'm not doing anything different here. I'm using an array of ints in this situation. I'm still using a for loop to process that list and setting it to random values, although I am now casting my random values to integers because I changed my array to use integers. Okay, but there's one thing I added here. Before my loop started, I added a variable called total. And total is a place where I can keep a running total. We call that variable, when we do this, that variable gets a special name. That is it's called an accumulator. So this is an accumulator variable. And I like to tell people that an accumulator is like that junk drawer that everybody has at home. It starts out as an empty drawer. And somebody goes to put something away and they're not sure where it goes, so they throw it in the junk drawer. And now the junk drawer has 1 item in it. And then later on, somebody doesn't know where to put something else, and they throw it into that junk drawer. And now that drawer has 2 items in it. And that drawer just keeps on accumulating more and more junk. And then at some point, somebody has to go through and clean out the junk. But that's what an accumulator variable is. It starts at 0, and as we go through this loop, each time through, we're going to add a little bit of junk to that drawer. We're going to take the value that we stored in my list after we generated that random number, and we're going to add it to the total and store it back in the total. So total is going to start at 0. If the first random number is 5, it's going to throw 5 into the drawer. If the next random number is 3, it's going to take 5. It's going to take the 3 and add it onto the 5, and now we have 8. And it will continue to do that, and this total will continue to accumulate our total until the very end. Okay, when the loop's over, this variable total will have the grand total of all the values in this array. So we're going to print it out just like we always have, just like I have in the previous examples. But then after the for loop prints out all the individual values, I'm going to have it print that total, that using that accumulator variable called total. All right, I'm going to change the size to 5 for this one, just so it's not so long. And let's run it. And there we see it. 94, 49, 40, 98, 64. So the first time through, total got the value 94. The second time through, it added 49 onto that. The third time through, it added 40 onto that, then 98 onto it, then 64 onto it, till it finally came up with the total at the end. After the loops were done, our total was 345. 345 was the total of those variables. If I run it again, this time it was 216. All right, so that's processing a loop using a for loop and an accumulator variable to add up a running total that we can use when our loop is finished. All right, I paused the recording. I modified the code a little bit more to show you another technique that we can use. We can use this to find a maximum, or sometimes we use it to find a minimum value. In this case, I'm going to find a maximum value. So I'm using the same things that I used before. I'm using size of 5, creating a list of integers, an array of integers called myList. That's why I don't like that variable name. I have my accumulator variable for the total, but I've also created another value to hold the maximum value. And notice what I did here. I said, let my maximum value be -1. Now I know this loop is going to generate all positive numbers between 0 and 99. So I know the first number that gets generated will be larger than -1, and it will become the new maximum. So I've seeded this max with the value of -1, knowing that it's going to change immediately. So it's a value that I know everything is going to test larger than that. Okay. We have the same for loop that we did before. It's generating a random number from 0 to 99. It's adding each number onto the total, but it's also doing something else. It's doing a little comparison right here. It's going to compare the value of maximum, which starts at -1, to the current number in the array. And if the current number in the array is greater than the maximum, then it says, I want the maximum to be that number. So imagine this. The first time we go through, the random number is 5. So if 5 is greater than -1, because the first time through max is going to be -1, and it is 5, any number we get in here is going to be greater than -1. The new maximum is now 5. The next time through, it generates another random number. Say it generates a 7. Well, 7 is greater than 5, so the maximum becomes 7. The next time through the loop, it might generate a 2. Well, 2 is not greater than 7, so it doesn't change the maximum value. Leaves it alone. Run through it again. The next time it generates the random number 90. Okay, 90 is greater than 7, so now the new maximum value is 90. Once we've gone through all the numbers we're going to generate, after this loop is done, max will have the largest value of any of the values that we generated. And down here, we're going to print them out like we did before. We're still going to print the total, but I'm also going to print out the maximum number. So let's do 10 numbers this time. I'm going to generate 10 numbers. Let's run it. And there are 10 numbers, 8, 20, 22. So you can see what happened here. The max was 8, then the max became 20, then it became 22, then it became 89. Okay, then 56 wasn't bigger than 89, so it remained 89. 15 wasn't bigger than 89, it remained 89. 85 wasn't bigger than 89. 29, 50, 53, on through, and at the end, our max was 89. If we want, we could actually print that out. Now we'd have to print it while our generation was running. We could do that though. Let's do that. I'm just going to print out, let's print out my list sub I, and then we'll concatenate onto that 3 spaces, and then we'll concatenate on the current max value. Okay, so that'll run while it's being generated, and it'll still print out the numbers at the end and the max. So we'll go ahead and run that. So let's go up here. So first number was 20, the max was 20. The second number was 15, the max remained 20. 35 was bigger than 20, so it became the max. Then 69 was bigger than 35, and it became the max. And these were smaller, so it stayed 69, 69. 79 was generated, the max became 79. 92 was generated, the max became 92. Then here's the loop where we print out the numbers by themselves, the total, and the max at the end. So we can do that for max. Obviously, if we reverse that sign and called it min, we could reverse that logic, but we would need to make sure we start by initializing the minimum value to something insanely high, so we're guaranteed that the first time through the loop, it gets something will be less than that. So if we know we're doing 0 through 99 for our random numbers, maybe we initialize it to 101, because we're guaranteed the first number we generate will be smaller than 101. All right, that's going to be enough for this video. We've looked at several different algorithms that we can use with for loops to process arrays. We process each element of the array one at a time using a for loop that counts from 0 to 1 less than the length of the array, which gives us the number 0 through 1 less than whatever the length is. Make sure you practice those. Make sure you go through them and understand those algorithms, because they're algorithms that we will use all the time with arrays and also with some other data structures. It's not just arrays. So make sure you practice those and understand them.